Welcome back. A quick recap of our top story. Major changes have been made to Singapore's electoral map for the upcoming general election. In total, there will be 18 GRCs and 15 SMCs. That's 2 more constituencies compared to the last election in 2020. Now, earlier, Senior Minister of State for Digital Development and Information, Janil Puthucheary, gave his take on what some are calling extensive changes to the boundaries. Dr. Janil, who is also MP in Pasir Ris Punggol GRC, was speaking with my CNA 938 colleagues Daniel Martin and Lance Alexander.
What we do know and what we can see, it's about the population growth. It's about the need to make sure that the number of electors per MP remains within a certain boundary, about the number of GRCs and the number of SMCs. And as a result of which, these are the boundaries that are there. I know that in the ELD, they put out this report detailing really in great detail why they made these choices. I think it's the first time that ELD has done that, just walking all of us through the rationale. You know, part A, population shifts, and then part B, consequential, and then part C, let's tidy up some of the boundaries. And so that whole issue of population shifts, the sort of constitutional requirements of how ELD does its job, and then the administrative tidying up of certain boundaries. I think there's a rationale behind it. I think it's very clear to anyone who reads the report. Yes, lots of speculation in the media, but I think, you know, if it's 1 GRC, 1 SMC, 4 extra seats as a proportion of our existing legislature and our existing electoral base, would you call that extensive? I think it's appropriate.
I think the headline for a lot of people is the shape and the demographic changes and the movement of some of the boundaries that might seem extensive. And you're right, reading that report might answer a lot of the questions as to the public perception associated with that as well. But let me take your hot take on that, because the immediate public reaction in terms of perception has been, wow, look at the extensive changes to places like Marine Parade or East Coast or West Coast, where the map has shifted quite a bit.
Well, I think part of it's our fault in Punggol, right? Because our population has grown so much that we then have become carved out as a new GRC for the next election. That has a consequential effect then on Pasir Ris, because the Pasir Ris without Punggol is currently 3 electoral divisions, and you need a little bit more a population number to justify a 4th person or a 4th MP, because the minimum size for the GRCs currently is 4. So it's a little bit like a Sudoku puzzle. You know, you sort of solve one bit and then it has an impact all the way down through the rest of the. So there's a knock-on effect. I mean, Pasir Ris, its population has grown as well, but and so what you're seeing in all the adjacent constituencies, I believe, if I understand the report, is a consequence then of where the population has grown very significantly in the northeast.
And for more, we're joined by political analyst Associate Professor Eugene Tan. He is from the School of Law at SMU and joins us live on Zoom from Hanoi. Professor Tan, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now that battle lines are drawn, how will it affect how the PAP deploys its political office holders to anchor GRCs?
Shaida, well, I think the ruling party will continue to deploy ministers, to anchor their group representation constituency lineups. But I wouldn't be surprised if for this coming general election, we see perhaps, junior political office holders. So this would be your senior ministers of state who might be anchors, because we are looking at, slightly more GRCs. And unless, the PAP were to redeploy from the GRCs where they have more than one cabinet minister, then I think, they will need to tap on the junior political office holders.
Any significant moves that you are expecting of ministers and political office holders that you are watching specifically, Prof?
Well, I think I would look at West Coast GRC, which will be renamed for the upcoming general election. I think the question there is, how will the ruling party beef up its lineup in that GRC? Given the resignation of former Transport Minister S. Iswaran. The question of whether there might be a move in mind for Minister for National Development, Desmond Lee. I think it is also worth looking at Marine Parade GRC, because it would appear that Minister Edwin Tong will be moving to East Coast GRC. And so the question of whether, the PAP, will want to move another political office holder to Marine Parade GRC. So I think these are just two. I think the party will obviously have to respond to what they see, would be the lineup of some of their fiercest competitors, right? In particular, the Workers' Party.
All eyes on West Coast GRC and Marine Parade GRCs, as you mentioned. But let's take a look at the opposition-held Aljunied GRC. It will lose 3 polling districts. Has this ever happened before to an opposition-held constituency? And what does this mean for the Workers' Party ultimately?
Yeah, I think it should be borne in mind that, there is nothing in the law or convention relating to the EBRC, that the opposition held constituencies, that their electoral boundaries are immune, from adjustment. I think it's just that, there hasn't been a real need to redraw the boundaries of opposition held constituencies. But we have an adjustment, in this particular EBRC report. So as you mentioned, Aljunied will be affected with 3 of the polling districts, being moved, to Tampines GRC. But I don't think that, this would really merit any sort of extreme concern, from the Workers' Party. I think they are realistic to recognize, that changes would be inevitable. And by and large, the EBRC is also very mindful, of not stirring unnecessary controversy. So, but I think what it boils down to, is that in the past, to the best of my knowledge, that there has been no adjustment. But as I said, there is nothing, to say that boundary changes do not apply to opposition-held electoral divisions.
But if you look at the new boundaries, Professor Tan, how will they affect the opposition that may have already walked the ground in these areas for some months, which will be most affected?
I think, in general, one would say that the opposition parties, particularly the smaller ones, tend to be affected by electoral boundary changes, whether they are extensive or not. Boundary changes don't affect the PAP to any significant level, and that's simply because, the PAP covers the entire island. They will contest in every seat, and so that means that, they do have their party activists, their volunteers, party members, walking the ground. So boundary changes don't affect them as much, but you would have the opposition, who might be contesting or walking the ground in very discrete electoral divisions. And so when you have, fairly significant changes, that could affect them. So if you look, for example, at Bukit Batok single SMC, which will be absorbed into Bukit Batok GRC, Dr. Chee Soon Juan of the Singapore Democratic Party, will be impacted. But I think that's really, not so much an outcome of the electoral boundaries redrawing, because, the EBRC cannot take into account party-specific preferences or needs or requirements, because if that were to be the case, then it would be a situation where the opposition parties are dictating how the electoral boundaries will be drawn. So I would say that, yes, they will be impacted. And I think where you see those significant changes, right, whether it's in the northeast part of the island, such as what is now Pasir Ris Punggol GRC, which will be converted to 2 4-member GRCs, and as well as, Bukit Batok GRC, which will impact upon, neighboring electoral divisions comprising both of SMCs as well as GRCs.
And mere hours after the EBRC report was released, Professor Tan, we are already starting to see potential 3 or 4 cornered fights with several opposition parties jostling to claim seats. We are going to bring up some of these party reactions we have seen online. Let's take a look at them. For instance, the People's Alliance for Reform, led by Lim Tien, is looking at a total of 8 SMCs and 2 GRCs. And among these are Tanjong Pagar GRC, Radin Mas SMC, and the new Jalan Kayu SMC. But these are the same places that Red Dot United is intending to contest among the party's wish list of 3 GRCs and 3 SMCs. The PAR will also likely go up against the National Solidarity Party in Jalan Besar GRC. Now, the NSP wants 5 GRCs and 2 SMCs. Meanwhile, Singapore People's Party is gunning for Potong Pasir SMC and Bishan Toa Payoh GRC. So, Professor Tan, with some opposition parties already staking claims here, should we expect more 3-cornered or even 4-cornered fights? And what would this mean for the ruling party?
What we're witnessing now really is jostling, right? This staking of claims, so that when typically the opposition parties, would have a meeting, a powwow of sorts, to try to resolve, conflicting claims, to the different electoral divisions. And given that, we will see a fair number of new electoral divisions, then there could be the additional, complication, of who has, in a way, a better claim, to the new electoral divisions. But I think, the opposition parties are pragmatic and realistic enough, to recognize that they will have to avoid multi-way contests. That the best outcome, going into the general election, or on nomination day, would be for there to be straight fights between the PAP and an opposition party, across the entire island. But I wouldn't be surprised, if you may have several, multi-way contests, because we are now seeing a fairly fragmented political landscape, with many opposition parties, and even in the powwow, we probably wouldn't expect, the leading opposition party, the Workers' Party, to be at that meeting. So it's going to be a battle of swords. And so what we're seeing now, right, is really this overstaking of their claims. And I think the idea is that, they want to go into that meeting, with bargaining chips, so that, they would have the sort of outcome that they would desire.
And where can we expect the most heated contests to be at?
I think, certainly one can say that, in any contest that involves, the ruling party, against the opposition part, leading opposition party, the Workers' Party, I think that's something that we can expect the contest, to be very heated. But looking beyond, party personalities or parties that are contesting, I think it is also a case, right, where some of the heated contests, could revolve around issues that are perhaps, identified with particular candidates. So I think, when you look at what has been discussed so far, I do worry, that immigration could be an issue, that could become very hotly contested. And then that would be then associated, with election candidates, that take very strong positions, with regard to immigration. So it's a combination of, who's contesting, which parties, what are some of the issues, that are identified with certain more prominent election candidates. But I think, we can certainly expect, this election, to be a very closely watched, to be very closely contested overall.
Very quickly, Professor Tan, a lot more double-barreled names of constituencies this time to reflect the identity of their states. How accurately do the names of the current wards reflect actual geographies on the ground, and what would this mean?
Shaida, the EBRC has tried to, reflect the realities on the ground. So having a double-barreled name, is certainly more inclusive, than having just a single name. But the reality is that, you will not be able to cover, different identities on the ground. So one good example would be the rename Marine Parade Braddell Heights GRC, which will now include parts of Potong Pasir and McPherson, and one could imagine that residents and voters from those two, Potong Pasir as well as McPherson, may come to the view that the renamed GRC still doesn't quite capture it. But I think it is a very encouraging attempt, and I hope that voters recognize that it will not be possible to cover the entire range of constituencies unless we were to go into triple barrel names or even more.
All right, Professor Tan, thank you so much for breaking all that down for us. Associate Professor Eugene Tan there from SMU, speaking to us live from Hanoi.